I don't think modern education is going to survive the age of artificial intelligence. Today, I want to talk about why that's the case and why that should really matter to you. A lot of people are talking about whether or not artificial intelligence is a bubble, economically speaking. And that's a real concern. It's a significant possibility that would have ramifications for all of us. But while we're busy debating whether or not it could be a bubble, I worry that we're almost completely missing the fact that it is almost certainly a needle. And that needle is going to burst some really important balloons. One of those is the balloon of modern education. In order to understand why artificial intelligence poses such a threat to modern education, first we need to understand something about what modern education is, or how we tend to think of and practice education. I'm thinking here in particular, this may apply broadly in the West, but I'm thinking particularly in my context in America or in the United States. So the first thing that probably everyone is aware of, it's no secret that modern education isn't performing particularly well, despite the fact that here in the States we spend something like $1 trillion every year, a sum that we really don't even understand what that number means. We're spending that kind of money on it, but it isn't getting us the results that we want. So we could cite a few, there are many things we could cite here, but for example, there was a 2024 NAEP reading statistic that showed that only 1/3 of high school graduates are reading proficiently. That means 2/3 of the graduates that we move through our K through 12 education system come out without being able to read proficiently. Or we could point to a 2007 NACE report that showed that employers complain consistently about new hires' lack of ability to write and read well, that reading and communication were particularly lacking. And next to that, they listed critical thinking skills as being almost absent. We could also listen to the professors at Ivy League schools here in the States who are saying that the students coming to them, who are supposed to be the best and brightest students our education system is pushing up or producing, that they struggle to complete reading assignments that were considered fairly basic 20 or 30 years ago. And while none of that is a good sign, I don't think that's actually the real problem. So the real problem isn't that our education system isn't able to meet the goals that it's setting, while that is a problem. The real problem is that we don't have the right goals to begin with. As Socrates put it in Plato's Republic, education is not what the professions of certain men assert it to be. The same thing is true today. We have largely forgotten the purpose of education, what it is and what it's for, and in its place, we have substituted something else. That something else, I think, can roughly be summed up as a sort of training or preparation for economic utility. We have geared our education system and we have taught our students to think of education as a way to prepare them for the workplace. And if you're watching this, you probably think, well, what else would we do? Of course, we're going to do that. And my point isn't that that's a mistake to have that included in our education. My point is that when we reduce education to that, we've made a grave error. And I think you can see this if you talk to young people. So I've talked to quite a few young people. If I ask someone, for example, who is in high school, why are you going to school? Why do you show up every day and do it? Maybe because their parents force them or whatever. But ultimately, if you push a little bit, it's so that I can get a job or so that I can go to college. If it's so that they can go to college, you ask, well, why do you want to go to college? So that I can get a job. Ultimately, the whole purpose of education, the whole reason why they're there, the reason that they're taking their classes and trying to perform at a certain level, all comes down to the kind of job that they hope to get. And so we have turned the entirety of education towards this one single thing, which is economic utility, your ability to contribute to society economically and then be reimbursed for that. And really, it's the reimbursement that we've even focused on. We're not really even training people to think like, I want to contribute to the economics of society or my country. It's more so just, I want to get a job that makes me money so that I can pursue the American dream and be happy. And another sort of symptom of this is students constantly asking, why am I learning this? Or the way that they typically tend to put it, when am I ever going to use this? And this stuns teachers a bit, despite the fact they get asked it quite a bit. I don't think most teachers have any idea how to actually answer that question. And it's not their fault. They too are a product of our current educational system and educational philosophy that has permeated pretty much all of society. And so we can contrast this modern way of thinking about and carrying out education with something older. In fact, we can reach all the way back to ancient Greece, to Plato, to Aristotle, and to many who have followed in their footsteps in a way and built on that and from it over the past 2 millennia. And that view of education is something much more like this. The philosophy of education is that the purpose of education is the formation of one's soul to love and to know what is true and good. The point of education is forming people to know and to love what is good, and that will then sort of work its way up to the good of society, to the health of the republic, in our case, the democratic republic. And that is a unifying aim. That is something that can draw together all of the knowledge, all of the understanding, all of the different disciplines that we are learning into one unified pursuit that is for something that really matters. But that is not what we're doing today. Today, we teach individual, isolated subjects without students really understanding what they're for or how they all connect and relate to each other and why we're learning the whole set of things that we are supposedly trying to learn. Today, even within those subjects, we're learning fragmented, isolated ideas. We're reading little excerpts instead of whole works. We're memorizing individual facts without understanding why they even matter and relate to the whole. As Neil Postman used to tell his graduate students, the purpose of a college education is to win television game show contests. It is the only context in which all that disconnected trivia that you've picked up over 4 years could possibly find a use. His point is this: the way that we're approaching education, K through 12, college education, all of it, is to give all these little bits and pieces and fragments of information, and students have no wholesome way of integrating that into a unified system of knowledge and understanding. It's preparing them at best to win a trivia game. And so education has already been hollowed out. Like a balloon, it has the form, the shape of substance, but there's very little going on inside. And that explains why even, or perhaps especially, the top students going to top universities are hollow, because education makes its pupils in its own image. And so it's little wonder to me why somebody like the Princeton professor and political theorist Patrick Deneen has described his students this way. My students are know-nothings. They're exceedingly nice, pleasant, trustworthy, mostly honest, well-intentioned, and utterly decent. But their brains are largely empty, devoid of any substantial knowledge that might bear the fruits of an education and an inheritance and a gift of a previous generation. They are the culmination of Western civilization, a civilization that has forgotten nearly everything about itself, and as a result has achieved near perfect indifference to its own culture. And it's worth noting that this doesn't just apply to K through 12 or college education. In fact, it's one of the symptoms of our poor understanding or poor philosophy of education that we would even think that we would think when you hear the term education, you immediately think of a school or an institution. Well, that's because we have confined education to the training or preparation of students for economic utility, which is what happens at these institutions. And it's worth noting that this doesn't just apply to K through 12 or college education. In fact, it's a symptom of our impoverished philosophy of education that we have come to think that education is effectively limited to our time in school. Once you get out of school, you're educated. It's over. It's done. This couldn't be further from the truth. That is the beginning of your education. And it should be a great supplement to that. It should set you up for a lifetime of education. I don't think that's happening at all, which again gets back to the problem with our modern idea of education. But that's what it should do. Modern education in its institutional form should be a great help. It should be a structured way in which we prepare students for lifelong education as they continue to grow and be formed and shaped as human beings. So what does all of this have to do with artificial intelligence? Well, it turns out that our modern system of education that's built on our modern philosophy of education is especially susceptible to being dismantled by artificial intelligence. And we can see that when we think about the economic utility component that I mentioned earlier, that education has roughly been reduced to preparing students to be economically useful or productive, because you can easily see how artificial intelligence could make that obsolete. In fact, that's what many people are predicting, whether they're right or wrong. And so, for example, we are teaching students how to write well, or at least we're supposed to be. We're trying. That's one of the goals or aims of education. Teach students to write well. And why are we doing that in the student's mind? What's the story we tell ourselves and students? Well, so that you can get a job as a journalist, so that you can get a job as a copywriter, or maybe just so that in your regular, whatever job you get, you can communicate well. So we're teaching you that, again, for the workplace. But what happens when artificial intelligence can do that communication for you, and it can do it a lot better and faster and more efficient than you can? Now, the point of learning how to write well has just become completely obsolete. We teach students biology, perhaps to prepare them for med school or so that they can be a veterinarian. But what happens when an AI bot has more knowledge about biology than any living human being? What's the point? And so fundamentally, the problem, again, is that we've reduced education to being about producing economically useful human beings. And when that economic utility, the ability to carry out economically useful tasks, can be outsourced to AI, we're left asking, what is the point of the whole education we're doing? And so if nothing else, artificial intelligence is radically undermining students' motivation to learn. And just imagine the plight of teachers who are faced with students who have already figured out that they can use AI to do virtually everything they're being taught. That everything they're being taught to do cognitively can be done faster and more efficiently by AI now. And they're being told that in 5 years from now, AI will be so much more advanced, it'll be PhD level at everything. And that AI may replace any number of jobs in the near future. How motivated would you be to learn as a student if that was the story you were being given? And so the reason why modern education can't survive the age of artificial intelligence is because the story we've been telling our students, the story we've been telling ourselves about the purpose of education, what it is and what it's for, is just too thin. But imagine we adopted a new philosophy of education. Or better yet, imagine we adopted an old philosophy of education, one much more like what I said earlier, that the point of education is the formation of human souls to know and to love what is true and what is good. That kind of idea, that philosophy of education would be insulated from the harmful effects of artificial intelligence because it doesn't matter what kind of extrinsic tools you have. Every single individual still has the need to be formed within themselves, to be formed and developed as a human being. And it doesn't matter what kind of tools you have access to. That has nothing to do with who you are as a human being, except to the extent those tools can be used and placed in service to that greater good of your personal development. And so my hope, which perhaps is overly optimistic, but my hope is that as artificial intelligence, this needle of artificial intelligence, makes contact with the balloon that is modern education, my hope is that it will reveal to all of us or uncover the fact that modern education isn't real education to begin with. And perhaps as we realize that, we will in fact adopt a better, stronger, more resilient philosophy of education. And that's not something that just matters for our kids or future generations or people who will be in those schools in 5, 10, 20 years from now. That's something that matters for every living person right now. Because again, education isn't supposed to stop when you graduate from school. Education should continue throughout your life. And so this is something that's going to affect all of us. In fact, if you're somebody who is inclined to lifelong education, you may even find yourself questioning, why do that? Because now I have this tool that can give me all the answers I need. Why learn history? Because I can always look up historical facts and information almost instantaneously. Why memorize anything or learn or come to understand something? Because I have a tool that can get all of that for me anytime I want or need it. But as I pointed out earlier, this completely misses the point, which is that education is about who you are becoming. And going back to Plato and Aristotle, it isn't just about you as an individual or about a bunch of isolated individuals, because we are together in a community, and in fact, in something of a republic. And so it's not just about the health of the individual psyche, but the health of the city. Psyche, I just mean soul, the Greek word for soul. So it's not just about the health of you as an individual and your well-being, but all of us. And if you go back and read the founding fathers, if you read Jefferson, Madison, or John Adams, all of them have commented on the fact that they didn't think our system could possibly work if the general population was not properly educated. And when they use the term education, they don't mean if they didn't become economically useful. They mean if they didn't become educated, if they didn't have an understanding, and if they weren't shaped morally, if they didn't have virtues that were instilled in them through that education, and if they didn't have an understanding of the world and what matters and why it matters. That's the kind of thing that we need to pick up from our education, and that's something that we can pick up the rest of our lives. And speaking of Thomas Jefferson, he made the point in corresponding, giving some advice to somebody, that you don't have to hang all of your education on an institution. In fact, he recommended that instead the young man read books himself. He viewed the primary activity of education as being self-directed and coming to us through the reading of great books. And the education from professors was somewhat supplementary. From teachers or professors is supplementary, something to supplement that. And it's extremely helpful and valuable in that way. But the primary way we educate ourselves is through reading. And this, of course, ties into what we're doing here at the Morning Light, where I am trying to encourage and equip people to spend more time reading great books and less time scrolling through meaningless, disconnected, isolated bits of information in short form content or whatever, and instead getting grounded in the depth of, in the wealth of great books that have been left to us. So if you're interested in that, make sure you hit subscribe, and you'll see me next time.